Have you ever sat in silence, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment someone broke you, and realized it wasn't an accident? That it wasn't clumsiness or carelessness, but something far more calculated? One of the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves, one that keeps us stuck, bleeding in silence, is this: they didn't mean to hurt me, but deep down, you felt it. There's a world of difference between someone making a mistake and someone making a move, between a slip of the tongue and a sharpened sentence aimed straight at your heart, between ignorance and intent. And you didn't imagine that difference. No, you lived it. You carried the weight of it in your chest, didn't you? They didn't just wander into your life and accidentally step on your soul. They walked in with their eyes wide open, calm, steady, fully aware. When they spoke, it wasn't a blur of emotion. No, it was strategy. Their timing was precise. Their words were chosen like weapons. And even knowing the weight of their choices, they chose to wound you anyway. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a mission. Building emotional intensity, making the audience reflect. And when that realization crashes into you, it shakes you. Not because you're weak, but because it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone you barely knew. Don't do it for someone you let in. Someone you defended when others questioned them. Someone you prayed for when they were at their lowest. Someone you'd give anything to protect. And they chose to use that closeness as a weapon. They didn't just break your heart. They betrayed the very safety you offered them. And that kind of wound, it doesn't bleed on the outside. It sits in your spirit like a silent scream. And the worst part, they knew. They saw the tremble in your voice, the hurt in your eyes, and they didn't flinch. He introduced the concept of hidden betrayal. You see, the enemy doesn't always show up dressed in red with horns. Sometimes he shows up with a smile. Sometimes he comes wearing loyalty. Sometimes he's wrapped in family ties or whispered promises of forever. And when the knife finds your back, it doesn't always feel like betrayal at first. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Like, how could they? Like, maybe I misunderstood. But you didn't. You just didn't want to believe it. You wanted to believe they were better than that. You wanted to believe the version of them. You used to know the version you needed to believe was still real. You wanted to believe that history meant something. That time meant trust. That shared memories meant shared values. But history doesn't equal honor, and time doesn't equal transformation. Some people don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. Wake-up call, confronting the truth. So when the mask finally falls, don't pretend you didn't see it. When someone shows you who they truly are, believe them. Don't dress their betrayal in excuses. Don't wrap it in justifications. Don't bury your pain beneath politeness. That ache you felt, that hole in your chest, the one that kept you up at night, questioning your worth, that was real. That silence you sat in after they walked away, as if you were nothing, that was real. The moment you broke, and they didn't blink, that was real too. And if they ever said, "I'm sorry," or "Don't forget this," sometimes an apology is just damage control, not repentance. Sometimes it's not about losing you, it's about losing power over you. Shift, exposing the patterns of intentional harm. Don't let your compassion make you blind. Because some people aim when they hurt. They don't act out of impulse, they act out of strategy. They study your soft spots. They learn your rhythms. They wait for the moment your guard is down, and then they strike. Not with clumsiness, but with precision. And you call it love. You call it friendship. You call it family. But let me ask you this. Since when did love come with a loaded weapon? Clarification. What real love looks like. Real love doesn't aim to break. Real love holds you when you're breaking. Real love doesn't twist the knife. It reaches for your wounds, not to deepen them, but to heal them. So many of us, too many of us, keep reopening the door to the very people God rescued us from. We keep whispering, maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe they were just hurting. Maybe I'm just too sensitive. And listen, grace is beautiful. But grace without wisdom? That's bondage. Yes, forgiveness is a command, but foolishness is a choice. God never asked you to hand your heart back to the person who shattered it. He told you to guard it, to protect it, to walk in truth. And the truth is, if they hurt you on purpose once, they'll do it again. Closing shift, call to self-worth and boundary. Stop giving second chances to people who use the first one to destroy you. Stop thinking loyalty means tolerating pain. Stop measuring love by how much you can endure. Start measuring it by how much you are nurtured, respected, safe. You see, once you stop handing the key to your peace back to the very hands that shattered it, something begins to shift. You begin to remember what you truly deserve, not just survival, but peace, safety, and love that doesn't come with a warning label. You deserve to be respected, to be honored, to be protected, not just sometimes, not when it's convenient, always. You were never created to live in a cycle of being torn apart, then blamed for pleading. That's not love. That's torment dressed in loyalty. And deep down you know that. I know it's hard. I know it feels like you're letting go of something precious, like losing a piece of yourself you once held tightly. But the truth is, you're not losing. You're learning. You're not releasing love. You're releasing a lie, one that told you this pain was your price for connection. You are clearing space for what God actually wants to place in your life. And sometimes, the only way to receive the right thing, the real thing, is to let go of what was never meant to stay, even if it feels familiar, even if you've grown attached to the hurt. Don't water down your pain just to keep someone by your side. Don't minimize what they did, because the thought of being alone feels unbearable. God never asked you to lie to yourself so that someone else could feel loved. If they damaged you on purpose, that's not love. That's manipulation. That's control. That's darkness pretending to be light. And it's time to name it. Not to shame them. Not to get revenge. But to set yourself free. Theme: true forgiveness versus foolish access. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, is one of the most powerful gifts God gave us. And it's not just for them. It's for you. When you forgive, you don't excuse what they did. You simply refuse to let it poison you any longer. You lay down the weight. You break the chains trying to bind your soul to bitterness. But let's be clear, forgiveness is not the same thing as access. Forgiving someone doesn't mean giving them the key to your peace again. The world has repeated the phrase, forgive and forget, so many times that we've confused wisdom with weakness. We start to believe that forgiveness means full restoration. That if we truly forgive someone, we're obligated to welcome them back in. Same door, same closeness, same trust. But that's not forgiveness. That's forgetfulness. And there's a difference. God absolutely calls us to forgive, but He never called us to be fools. He never said, let the wolf back into the sheepfold just because you prayed for him. Theme: boundaries after forgiveness. There are people you've forgiven in your heart, but they are not meant to walk with you into your next chapter. They were part of your wilderness, not your promised land. And just because you laid down, the grudge doesn't mean you need to pick up their hand again. Some of us are draining our souls, trying so hard to love people back into decency. We think if we just love harder, forgive deeper, stay longer, they'll change. But sometimes the most loving thing God does is create distance. That separation, that silence, that space between you, it might just be His protection. And if you keep forcing access to the very people God is trying to remove, you're not walking in forgiveness anymore. You're walking in disobedience. Forgiveness says, I release you. I choose not to carry this anger any longer. But it also says, I choose to protect the peace God gave me. And that peace, oh, it didn't come cheap. You cried for it. You fought for it. You had to crawl out of dark nights, broken places, and lonely prayers just to feel calm again. So why would you give it back to someone who didn't value it the first time? Letting someone back in just because you've forgiven them is like handing a thief the keys to your house just because you prayed after the last robbery. That's not healing. That's self-sabotage. Some people aren't sorry they hurt you. They're just sorry they lost access to you. They don't miss you because they loved you. They miss you because you were easy to use. Because you were always there, always kind, always forgiving. They counted on your goodness to cover their cruelty. But now you've found your strength. Now you've started seeing clearly. And suddenly they want back in, not to love you right, but to reset the cycle. That's why you must learn to forgive and still protect yourself. You can pray for someone from a distance, You can wish them well without opening your door. You can carry love in your heart without carrying their weight on your back. God isn't judging you for setting boundaries. He's watching whether you keep them. People will say, "But didn't you forgive them?" And your answer can be simple. Yes, I forgave them. But I also learned not to trust them again. That's not bitterness. That's clarity. That's not revenge. That's wisdom. The same God who told you to forgive also told you to guard your heart. And how can you guard it if you keep handing it over to those who only know how to break it? The world might whisper that forgiveness means reunion, that everything should go back to normal. But you know better now. Forgiveness is between you and God. Access is between you and discernment. And if God is closing a door, don't you dare prop it back open out of guilt. He sees what you don't. He heard what they said when you weren't around. He saw the intentions behind their smile. And sometimes, his greatest protection comes wrapped in isolation. He saw it all. The whispers behind your back. The intentions they never had the courage to say out loud. He saw the harm they planned while still smiling to your face. And sometimes God's protection doesn't come wrapped in angels and miracles. It comes wrapped in isolation. And yes, sometimes his mercy feels like loneliness. But trust me, that silence, it's not abandonment. It's deliverance in disguise. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because you've forgiven them. That's not pride. That's not bitterness. That's preservation. It's honoring what God has restored in you. So yes, bless them, release them, pray for them. But stop giving front row seats in your life to people who clapped when you fell. Stop re-inviting pain into places God has already healed. Stop handing the pen to people who once tried to erase your story. They didn't hurt you on accident, and that's what makes it so hard, isn't it? It wasn't just a moment of frustration. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't uncontrolled emotion. No, it was planned. They watched you. They studied your kindness. They listened when you spoke from your heart. They took note of what made your face light up, what made your voice tremble, what made you go quiet, what made you trust. And with all that knowledge, they chose to hurt you. That's what makes the wound go so deep. That's what makes it linger. Because it wasn't just the action, it was the awareness. They knew you. They knew the silent battles you were already fighting. They knew about the pain you were still healing from. They saw your vulnerability, your soft spots, your open heart. And instead of covering you, instead of protecting you, they used it all against you. That's not immaturity. That's not a mistake. That's intention. And I want to speak this plainly. It's okay to admit that. It's okay to call it what it was. We've been taught to soften the truth, even while we're bleeding. We try to carry betrayal with grace to make their cruelty easier for us to bear. We say things like, they were just going through something. Or maybe I overreacted. Or they didn't really mean it. But listen, when someone uses what you gave them in love to tear you apart in hate, that's not a misunderstanding. That's not love. That's a weapon. Some of you gave your loyalty to people who only wanted leverage. You gave your secrets to people who saw them as ammunition. You shared your dreams with those who silently hoped you'd fail. You thought they were listening out of care, but they were listening out of strategy. They weren't trying to get closer to your heart. They were trying to find the cracks, the places where you were tender, so they could strike exactly where it would hurt the most. But let me be clear about one thing. You are not foolish for trusting. You are not weak for loving. You are not naive because you believe the best in them. That's not your shame to carry. That's not your guilt to wear. The darkness they carried in their hearts is not a reflection of your light. What they did says everything about them, not about you. You were honest. You were kind. You were sincere. That is not something to apologize for. That is something to thank God for. Thank God you hadn't let the world harden you. Not yet. Thank God your heart was still soft enough to love, still open enough to care, still brave enough to trust. Yes, it was misused. Yes, it was taken advantage of. But that doesn't mean your heart was in the wrong place. It means theirs was. Some people know exactly what they're doing. They bait you with affection. They coat their motives with charm. They make promises they never intend to keep. And then, when your guard is finally down, they strike. That's what makes it so confusing, because everything looked real. Maybe some of it even was. But the hurt, that wasn't spontaneous. It was selected. It was precise. And that's what makes it so hard to forget. But listen closely. God saw it even when you didn't. He saw the manipulation. He saw the jealousy. He saw the way they used your goodness like a tool, then tossed it aside. And he let it come into the light, not to break you again, but to set you free. Because sometimes you can't see the truth until it wounds you. Sometimes it takes betrayal to finally stop explaining away the warning signs. You thought you were in a safe place, but you were in a setup. You thought they had your back, but they were just waiting for the perfect moment to twist the blade. That's not just wrong, that's evil. And yet, you survived it. You got through it. And now you see clearly. You see who they are. You see what they were doing. And most importantly, you see what God was protecting you from all along. Because the enemy doesn't launch random attacks. He doesn't always come from the outside. He uses what's close. He uses what's trusted. He uses what has access. Betrayal only works if it comes from the inside. But thank God today, what was meant to destroy you failed. What was meant to crush you awakened you. What was meant to break you built a fire in your soul that can't be put out. Maybe they thought you'd keep begging, keep hoping, keep waiting for them to return and finally do right by you. But you didn't. You stood up. You stood strong. And now you're still standing. You're still here. And more than that, you know better now. You no longer need to rewrite the truth just to make it easier to swallow. You don't have to close your eyes to what was clear all along. Because the facts, they speak for themselves. If they studied you, if they knew you, and still chose to hurt you, then that's not someone who deserves another invitation. That's someone God exposed. Let that exposure be enough. Let the truth be enough. Let it open your eyes, not your door. There comes a time, one sacred, holy, undeniable moment, where the most godly thing you can do is walk away. Not out of hatred, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You don't have to stay in a place where your soul is constantly under attack. You don't have to keep showing up in rooms where you're tolerated, but never treasured. There's a strength in walking away that most people will never understand. Because it takes courage. It takes obedience. It takes a heart that finally says no more. Not like this. See, the enemy would love nothing more than to trap you in a cycle of pain, of hollow apologies with no change, of empty promises that were never meant to be kept. He wants you to believe that staying makes you strong, that maintaining peace, even at the cost of your own, is somehow noble. But that's not peace. That's self-destruction. Love doesn't look like that. Love doesn't leave you in confusion. Love doesn't chip away at your self-worth. Love builds. Love protects. Love clarifies. It doesn't cloud. And sometimes, love for yourself and reverence for God's voice inside of you means turning your back on the very people who kept taking you for granted. Some people know you're valuable. They just hope you never realize it. They drain your energy because they're afraid of who you'll become without their control. Control? They keep you small. Not because they don't see your light, but because your light threatens their shadows. So they smile in your face, while slowly crushing your spirit behind closed doors. And when you speak up, they call you too sensitive. When you set a boundary, they call you selfish. But they never name the harm they caused, never face the damage they inflicted. And still, you stayed. You stayed hoping they'd see your heart. You stayed believing that loyalty would convict them. You stayed praying that love would be enough to make them change. But there comes a moment, clear as day, when you have to recognize that what God is showing you isn't about staying, it's about leaving. The healing you're praying for won't be found in holding on. It'll come through release. Let me tell you something plain and true. Walking away does not make you weak. It makes you wise. It means you've seen enough. It means you're done trying to convince someone to value what they were always supposed to protect. That's not pride. That's clarity. And yes, it will hurt. Yes, you'll grieve what you thought it could be. You'll feel the weight of everything you gave, of the time, the trust, the hope. But that pain, it's temporary. It's the sting of release. And on the other side of that sting, there's peace, real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on someone else's mood. The kind that doesn't require walking on eggshells. The kind that settles into your soul when you finally listen to the whisper of the Holy Spirit saying, "It's time." Some of you have been crying out for peace, and God's been answering you, not in thunder, but in truth. He's been giving you signs. He's been showing you fruit. He's been exposing hearts. And yes, he's been letting things fall apart, not to punish you, but to wake you up. And every time you stitch it back together, every time you excuse their behavior, every time you pretend it didn't happen, you delay your own deliverance. You've been pleading for restoration, while heaven already closed that chapter. Not every relationship is meant to be revived. Not every door that closes should be reopened. Sometimes the blessing is in the ending. Sometimes healing begins the moment you say goodbye. So don't let guilt convince you to stay where you're slowly being broken. You don't owe anyone your sanity. You don't owe anyone access to the healed version of you. When they played a part in wounding you, if they couldn't love you when you gave them everything, then they don't deserve you now that you've found your strength. Let them be shocked. Let them wonder. Let them sit with the silence they created, because your absence will say what your words never could. And your peace, it will speak louder than any explanation. And trust this, the same God who walked beside you through the valley, he will meet you on the road out. You're not walking away alone. You're walking with purpose. You're walking with protection. You're walking toward a promise that cannot be fulfilled in a place of pain. So remember this, forgiveness is not the same as access. We confuse the two far too often, especially when our hearts are tender and our hope still lingers. You can forgive and still move on. So yes, you can forgive. You can release the anger, let go of the bitterness, and still not reopen the door. That's not hard-heartedness. That's wisdom. That's preservation. That's honoring what God has rebuilt in you with his own hands. With all your heart, you can pray for them. You can speak blessings over their future. You can even hope they grow and heal, and still know deep within you they no longer belong in your life. That's not unforgiveness. That's clarity. You see, some of us were taught that to truly forgive someone, we had to pretend nothing happened. That real forgiveness meant swinging the door wide open again, welcoming them like no pain was ever caused. But that's not what forgiveness looks like when you're walking with God. Forgiveness means you lay down the heavy load, the offense, the outrage, the silent ache for revenge. You stop carrying the weight of what they did. You don't wish them pain. You don't need them to suffer. But you do protect what God has healed in you. Because here's the truth. Some people apologize, not because they've changed, but because you have. They feel the shift. They sense the silence. They see the strength rising in you, and suddenly they want back in. Not to honor your healing, but to interrupt it. That's where discernment must become your shield. Because while forgiveness is free, access must always be earned. You don't owe anyone re-entry just because you forgave them. Forgiveness is a gift you give for your own freedom. But access? That's a boundary you place for your own protection. If someone shattered your heart, if they mocked your trust, if they played with your sincerity, and they meant to, then it's not your job to hand them another chance to do it again. God calls you to forgive, yes, but never to be foolish. He never asked you to leave the gate open for someone who once walked in only to burn down what they didn't build. You can bless someone from afar. You can intercede for their soul and still choose to keep your distance, because some people weren't just part of a bad season. They were a warning, and the lesson they brought is now meant to protect your future. If you let them back in without repentance, without change, without the fruit of humility, you're not practicing forgiveness. You're handing yourself over to betrayal again. Forgiveness says, I don't hate you anymore. Wisdom says, but I don't trust you either. Both can live inside a healed heart. Both can walk together in maturity. Because grace is not stupidity. Mercy does not mean surrendering your boundaries. There are people who know how to say all the right things. They know how to cry at the perfect moment. They know how to look remorseful. But it's not repentance they're showing. It's performance. They're not changing. They're rehearsing. They're not convicted. They're calculating. They're not trying to rebuild. They're just trying to find the old key, reopen the old door and finish what they started. And if you confuse emotional manipulation for spiritual transformation, you'll find yourself right back in the same pit you just fought your way out of. That's why God says to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. It is possible to be loving and discerning, to be kind and cautious, to be merciful and still guarded. That's not cold. That's not unforgiving. That's called being a good steward of your soul. Because the enemy would love to convince you that forgiveness means passivity. But the Spirit of God, He teaches you how to forgive without surrendering. The boundaries that keep you safe. So listen closely. The person who broke you, they don't get to define your next season. Their apology, or lack thereof, does not determine your future. Their tears don't grant them access. Their guilt does not mean they're safe. You need to look for fruit. You need to look for humility. Not just words, but actions. Not just tears, but transformation. Not just guilt, but growth. Until then, they can stay on the outside of the gate, even as you pray for them on the inside of your heart. Forgiveness is about setting yourself free from what they did. But access, that's about who you're becoming now. It's about the new thing God is doing. It's about the future He's shaping in you. It's about protecting the space that will one day be filled with the right voices, the right relationships, the ones that nourish, not deplete. So if they come knocking on the same door they once slammed in your face, you don't have to answer. You don't have to re-explain. You don't have to reopen what God already closed. You can smile with grace, forgive with sincerity, and still say, no, not this time. God is doing something new in me, and there is nothing wrong with that. There's no guilt in guarding your growth, no shame in protecting your purpose, because if they truly cared, they never would have wounded you. If they truly respected you, they never asked to walk through the very door they burned down. There is something powerful, something holy about letting go. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. There are people who simply cannot go where God is taking you. Their chapter in your life has ended, and trying to force them into your future is like trying to fit shattered glass into a brand new window. It might look familiar, but it's broken and under pressure. It will cut you again. You see, there comes a time, sacred and necessary, when you stop hoping they'll see your worth, and you start walking like you already know it. That's not pride, that's healing. That's not arrogance, that's awareness. You can't keep pausing your purpose just to explain yourself. To people committed to misunderstanding you can't keep begging for basic respect from someone who had every chance and still chose to break you. At some point, you stop answering the call. You stop checking for a message. You stop waiting for an apology that will never come. And instead you lift your hands and say, Lord, I trust you with what's behind me, and I'm ready for what's ahead. And no, it's not easy. It hurts to release the ones you once prayed for. It stings to let go of someone you imagined would be part of your forever. But not everyone is assigned to your destiny. Some people were only meant to walk with you for a season, and when their time is up, it's not your job to carry them into your future. It's your job to obey God, even when obedience feels like loss. The enemy, he wants you stuck in old memories, stuck rereading old messages, stuck decoding the silence. Why? Because as long as you're looking back, you can't move forward. As long as you're holding on to what hurts you, you're not reaching for what can heal you. He knows that if he can keep your heart trapped in yesterday, you'll miss the blessing that's standing right in front of you today. But God is calling you higher, and sometimes elevation requires separation. You can't climb while dragging what's already fallen. You can't rise while holding hands with someone who refuses to get off the ground. You have to trust that letting go isn't failure, it's faith. It's not just about walking away, it's about making room. Room for peace, room for clarity, room for the people God sends, not confusion. You gave grace, you gave chances, you gave loyalty. And what did they give you? Wounds, silence, disappointment. At some point, love means closing the door. Not because you're cruel, but because you finally learned to be kind to yourself. It's not weakness to walk away from dysfunction. It's wisdom. It's not bitterness to stop reaching for someone who only hurt you. It's self-respect. And it's not unforgiveness to protect your heart from further damage. It's discernment. You cannot heal in the same space where you were broken. You cannot grow in the soil that tried to choke the life out of you. You cannot keep handing invitations to people who only came to steal your joy. God is not asking you to prove your worth to those who are blind to it. He's not asking you to chase people who already made their choice. What he's asking is for your heart. Fully surrendered, fully open, fully trusting. And let me remind you, just because they let you go doesn't mean you weren't worthy. Just because they walked away doesn't mean you weren't enough. Their actions were never a reflection of your value. Their betrayal didn't cancel your purpose. Their silence doesn't erase your calling. When people mishandle you, that's on them, not on you. You are still chosen, still anointed, still called for greater things. Letting go is not the ultimate end. It's merely the initial phase. It's the moment when you cease to merely survive and commence to live profoundly. It's the defining moment when you take away your peace once more. It's the crucial hour when you look into the mirror and genuinely remember who you are in the presence of Christ. From that very moment on, you no longer allow yourself to settle. You no longer take on half mea culpa or borrowed loyalty. You no longer place yourself in a position of waiting for someone who only leaves you feeling empty. You step forward. Maybe you do so with a hint of trembling. Maybe you do so with scars to show for it. Yet you move free from the burden. Because when the divine healing takes place within you, it doesn't merely fix what was damaged. It bestows upon you a brand new heart, a renewed vigor, a newfound joy. And when the healing ceases, it doesn't necessarily return what was once lost. Rather, it prepares you for the life it's destined to have ahead. So allow the door to remain closed. Allow silence to fill the space. Allow the past to truly be the past. And do not you hesitate to embrace the truth that God has already shut it all to one side. The right individuals will not need to be pursued for you. The ones chosen by God will not need to be persuaded for you. And the life He's preparing for you, it is not built upon carrying someone who might have tried to tear it down. So let go. Release yourself from being tied up with God and walk in the truth of freedom.